5 more Masonic books you should consider adding to your Masonic library. Welcome to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry channel, everybody. I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, your host here on the channel. Welcome, and please take a second, subscribe to the channel. You can do so by just clicking that little button below that says subscribe. Give us a thumbs up on the video. Drop a comment, especially if you're a brother from another jurisdiction or you're a Scottish Rite Mason. Say hi from your valley. We'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. And please do share the video. And don't forget to turn on those notifications. That is also important. Last month on the channel, I did a video about 5 books you should add to your Masonic collection. And my stipulations were that these should be accessible, ones that anybody could read, and also they should be available, ones that anybody could go and pick up on a shelf or get the Kindle edition or what have you. This month, here I am in the House of the Temple Library again, surrounded by 250,000 of the world's best Masonic books. And I thought, you know what, let's step outside of our library, step outside of the House of the Temple building, and talk to some brothers who have their own Masonic libraries amassed. Brother Andrew Owen, he is a PhD in music history from the Valley of Baton Rouge in Louisiana. And he and I have chatted on Facebook quite a lot, and I know he had a great library. So I said, Brother Andrew, what are your 5 books?
The focus of my dissertation was on music in secret societies.
Oh, cool.
So the 3rd chapter deals with a book that is there at the House of the Temple, the music for the degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in 4 volumes. I focus on the 1st volume for that chapter of my dissertation, where this is a book that Pike approved in 1881 by Matthew Cook, 30th degree, the honorary grand organist of the Scottish Rite, Southern jurisdiction. I share my fraternal life between Freemasonry and a music fraternity called Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonia.
So my question, I hit you up on Facebook and I said, give me your 5 books that you recommend to other people. And when I did this, my caveat was that they had to be available and accessible, meaning it had to be okay for, a regular person to read and be able to get something out of, because some of these things, that takes a little time to sit down with and process. And not everybody has that time or that ability. And the other thing was, some of these things are just not available on a shelf somewhere that you can go and get. And so those were my barometers. And when I said to you, I said, you can do anything you want, but it should be something that somebody could go and get. Because as we mentioned, you've got that music book of the Scottish Rite. There's only a handful of copies of that floating around. So we can't recommend that because people can't really go and get it.
Making it commercially available was a big, big challenge, of course, because since 2015, I have recorded about 200 hours of the words of Albert Pike. I've had a lot of fun just sitting with a nice microphone and just enunciating and letting Pike sort of teach me the art of oratory, the art of enunciating a sentence so that it makes perfect sense on the way out. And so it creates like a musical score when you're reading text. But that, of course, has given me so much time with Albert Pike that it's hard not to recommend things that are his. And the only really publicly accessible work that he had a lot to do with is the Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite. I will at least address some of people's main concerns with this book, because I feel like it often gets short shrift for its style. Morals and Dogma, here is that book. Of course, we always talk about it. It's the most ubiquitous book because, for many reasons, not only because it is a work of art inside, but it is just, it's consistent. He never writes in a way that you would be ashamed of. He has a real beauty to it. In the 1830s, Albert Pike was critiqued positively by the poet Edgar Allan Poe as being one of the best living poets of the classical style. And Pike, of course, is a poet of the classical style. He is a person who knows how to write things that should stand the test of time. What Morals and Dogma is, you'll notice, is not published in his name. In fact, I would be hard-pressed to find anything that was ever published within his lifetime with his name on it. This is this book is called Morals and Dogma of the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, prepared for the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States and published by its authority. There's no Pike on that title page. Pike is here in the copyright because he's the one who entered it into the Library of Congress. But other than that, this is a book. This is a compilation of lectures meant to be read aloud, meant to have people crowded around in a room and one person reading it to them, stopping as necessary and letting the beauty of the oratory read nice and slowly. So I'm sure I've heard people complain about how Morals and Dogma is rather difficult to read. It's not. It's all you have to do is read it aloud. So yeah, Morals and Dogma was the first one that I wanted to throw out. And I enjoyed this question because I was racking my brain. I think if you're going to understand the 28th, I mean, the Night of the Sun degree and the Night of the East and West degree, you have to have some knowledge of Kabbalah. Masonry, the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite, does not require Kabbalistic subscription, I guess, if you want to call it that. We have in our degrees references to these concepts, which are elucidated using systems from the Kabbalah, from the Kabbalistic traditions. And if you really want to get a sense of what Kabbalah says in a really readable sense, because Kabbalistic books are very full of jargon. You think Pike's hard to read. Pike reads, I mean, I'm telling you, Pike is C. Jane Run compared to most of the jargon you'll find in technical exposés of Kabbalistic thinking. So the book God is a Verb by Rabbi David A. Cooper, I think, is a great introduction into the spirit and the nature of Kabbalah. God is a Verb, Kabbalah and the Practice of Mystical Judaism by Rabbi David A. Cooper. It is just a pretty wholesome, very personal and very readable explanation from start to finish about the nature of Kabbalistic teaching from the position of a person in a Jewish faith who has studied it and has tried a bunch of different things, has gone and studied with Sufi folks and studied with all other sorts of people to try and figure out what it is that Kabbalah itself is trying to get us to see, those who practice, and try to make sense of it. But all that to say, if you want to understand Kabbalah in sort of a conversational and easy in one way, the mysticism is not something to be taken lightly. It's something that people take very seriously. So this is a work that, if it were published 50 years prior, would have made this rabbi very much excommunicated from his rabbinical circles for exposing so much about the nature of Kabbalah, which is, again, a very private and a private system, which, like the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rites degrees, teach things to people only if they are ready to hear them. I find it very sincere. It's a lovely book. The next is a classic. If you want to understand symbolism and the nature of where humans get them, as best as we can tell, Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols is a lovely book. I found this paperback for very little money on Amazon a long time ago. You can take it to the beach. If you want a new lens for understanding the purport and meaning of many of the symbols that we have preserved in the institution of Freemasonry, which is just one of many institutions that use symbols to try to understand something deeper, this is a great book for starting that journey and actually being able to find similar symbols in our Masonic system and have some more historical but also psychological approaches to a lot of these symbols. The next one is from a friend of all of us, I'd say, who have spent very much time around Masons at big gatherings, and that's a man named Piers Vaughan. His Renaissance Man and Mason, I am a lovely fan of. I think it's one of the most useful books for lodges who are looking for a clean and clear, short talk kind of situation. It's written very sincerely and very carefully, and the things that Brother Vaughan asserts aren't particularly something that'll make you raise your eyebrow too much. Like when he speaks with a lot of clarity. He leads in his references, and through the course of it, if you're the kind of person who's looking for interesting things to open discussions with in your lodge, this is a lovely work. Renaissance Man and Mason by Piers Vaughan. can be very easily excerpted for launch talks. And I'm sort of torn for the fifth one between two books. So one is the least controversial, I would say, of the less controversial of the two, if we're talking about books that are useful for Masons. One is, of course, The Builders by Joseph Fort Newton. One of the beautiful things about that book, it very much respects the degrees. It respects the sacredness of the degrees, and also speaks in a way that if you are of those degrees, it makes perfect sense. And if you are not, it just reads like comfortable, easy prose. You don't make those connections. So my bonus book, if you want just a book that does very similar things to the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, does God exist? Well, if he exists, well, what's a sign that God exists? Well, how about the moral code? Okay, well, let's start with the moral code. What's the nature of morality? Why does everyone, regardless of moral philosophy, not want you to cut them in line at the grocery store? And just starting from there. That is C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. It's a book that I've actually heard an audiobook of at least 25 times. It's just one of those great things to keep rolling in the car all the time. But the book, even if you're not a Christian Mason, of which there are many non-Christian Masons, you can still read it with the same openness and charity that I think the writing style demands, which is a very genial and very friendly and believe what you want to believe kind of writing style. But this is where Lewis just takes you on a journey of, why do we all feel this moral code tugging at us? Which, by the way, is what the Lodge of Perfection does pretty consistently. Why? Okay, so we have that moral aspect to our being. Why do we have that moral aspect to our being? Let's actually sort out why we do what we do so that we can be less reliant on others for moral authority and actually try to be masters of ourselves, right? And so C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity just answers every question that beginning theists would have. And I would say that, and of course, in the latter part, it gets very deep into Christianity and what the Christian religion teaches. But even if you're not a Christian, we Masons have a certain appreciation and understanding of how atheism, we don't let atheists be Masons very consistently across all of our grand jurisdictions, except for very controversially the Grand Orient of France.
France, right.
But what Masonry does promote, at least internally, is the idea that atheism is kind of just an error, just a simple error that we can't work with as Masons. If that Masonry's work, and if you don't have the theism, then you're not going to be able to work as a Mason. So Masonry respects very much the idea of God, and it requires it, and it is definitely a big part of it. And teaching you not only the nature of God as much as all theistic people could agree, but also gets you to the idea, gets you to an appreciation for the fact that there are many other ways that people could come to different understandings of God, and it's okay for them to do that. That's something that we spend a lot of time in our Night Rose Fraud degree dealing with, that question. And I think when people get on the other side of that question and come out of it seeing the degrees for what they are, seeing all of our discussions about the nature of God and his revealings for what they are, then we wind up better brothers with people of all faiths.
That's Brother Andrew Owen. He is a Scottish Rite Mason from the Valley of Baton Rouge. And Brother Andrew and I had a really nice long conversation about books, about Freemasonry, and we wanted to share the whole thing with you, but YouTube, it was a little too long. So you can hear the entire conversation as part of the Tyler's Place podcast, and you can click the link above or click the link down below in the description. Thanks again, Brother Andrew, for your great selections and adding a few more things to my reading list. I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH. We'll catch you next time right here on the channel.